My name is Jason, and I had just moved into this old, drafty townhouse near the coast to save some money on rent. My cousin was already living there for a few months, and we usually just stayed out of each other's way during the week. Most nights were quiet. My cousin had this habit of going out to the small garden right outside my bedroom window after it got dark. Since the back door was always sticking, he would usually just knock on my window to let me know he was coming back inside. One Tuesday night around 8, I was sitting at my desk working on my laptop when I heard a loud knocking on the glass. It was that familiar rhythm he always used, so I figured he had forgotten his keys, or the door was stuck again. I finished typing my sentence and then got up to pull the curtains back, but when I looked out, the yard was totally empty. I walked into the kitchen to see if he had made it inside, and he told me he hadn't even been out all night. I tried to ignore it, but as soon as I sat back down, the knocking started again, louder and much faster than before. I jumped up and threw the window open as fast as I could, but there was absolutely nobody there in the dark. About a week later, things started feeling even heavier in the house, like someone was always standing right behind my shoulder. I was laying on my bed scrolling through my phone when I heard this faint, high-pitched humming coming from the corner of the ceiling. It sounded like a young girl singing a nursery rhyme, but the tune was off, and it made the hair on my arms stand up. I slowly looked up toward the top of my tall wardrobe and saw a small figure dressed in a white nightgown sitting there. She was hugging her knees and staring straight at me with eyes that looked like empty, dark holes in her pale face. I blinked hard because I thought my mind was playing tricks, but when I opened them, the singing stopped and she was gone. The scariest thing happened a few days later while I was taking a nap and felt this freezing pressure hit my chest. It felt like something cold and invisible was trying to push its way inside my body, making it almost impossible for me to breathe. I started hearing these voices in my head, all of them shouting at me to wake up and get out of the room. I fought to move my arms, and finally, the icy feeling drained out of me, and I could breathe normally again as the voices vanished. My bedroom door was wide open, even though I knew for a fact that I had locked it before I fell asleep. I ran out to find my cousin, but the house was completely silent and it turned out he wasn't even home. Just 3 days ago, I was sitting in the living room on the computer when the chair I was in started shaking like crazy. I grabbed the sides of the seat because I was sure we were having a massive earthquake and the floor was going to crack. But when I looked around the room, nothing else was moving. The water in my glass was still, and the lamps weren't swinging at all. My cousin was sitting right there on the couch looking at his phone, and he didn't seem to hear or feel a single thing. When I reached down to feel the legs of the chair to see what was happening, the shaking stopped instantly, like nothing had happened. My cousin just looked at me like I was losing my mind when I tried to tell him the chair was vibrating. The very next morning I decided to head outside to check the ground right under my bedroom window. I really wanted to see if there were any footprints or marks left in the dirt from the night before. The soil was still very damp from the sea mist, but there wasn't a single track to be found. Even the bushes against the wall looked completely untouched, like nobody had walked through them in a long time. I stood there for a while, staring at the glass and wondering if I was just losing my mind. My cousin eventually came out and asked what I was doing, looking at me with a lot of confusion. While I was poking around the base of the house, my foot hit something hard buried in the mud. I knelt down and started digging with my hands until I pulled out a small and rusted metal box. It was tied shut with a piece of rotted white fabric that looked just like the girl's dress. My heart started racing as I realized the fabric felt exactly like the cold pressure I felt earlier. I didn't really want to open it, but I felt this weird pull to see what was inside. Just as I went to pull the knot, I heard that same faint humming again from the garden. I dropped the box and scrambled back toward the porch as the humming grew into a loud scream. The sun was still out, but the air around the garden suddenly turned freezing and smelled like salt. I looked up at my bedroom window and saw the girl standing there, staring right down at me. This time she wasn't just sitting still. She was pressing her pale hands against the glass pane. Her mouth was moving fast like she was trying to tell me a secret I couldn't hear yet. My cousin finally walked over to me and his face went totally white as he saw the glass. For the first time, he actually saw her too, and he grabbed my arm to pull me back. The window suddenly shattered outward, and shards of glass flew everywhere across the grass in the garden. We didn't wait to see what happened next and ran straight for his car in the driveway. We drove to a hotel and stayed there for the rest of the week until we moved. We never went back to get our things alone and made sure to bring friends with us. My name is Elias, and for a long time, I was the kind of person who looked for a rational explanation for everything. Growing up in a quiet, inland valley town, Life was mostly predictable and safe until we moved into that drafty, two-story farmhouse. The house was old, with floorboards that groaned under the slightest pressure, and a history that the previous owners seemed eager to leave. I remember the first few weeks being remarkably peaceful, as the dense forest surrounding the property provided a silence I had never experienced. It was during that first summer, just as I was turning 14, that the boundary between my world and the sinister began to blur. Looking back, I realized that the stillness of the countryside was not a sign of peace, but rather a sign of something waiting. One night, I woke up abruptly from a dreamless sleep to find the air in my bedroom feeling impossibly thick and freezing cold. I tried to roll over to check the digital clock on my nightstand, but my body refused to obey even the simplest commands. It felt as though my limbs had been replaced by heavy lead, pinning me flat against the mattress while a force pressed down. The moonlight filtered through the tall oak trees outside, casting long, skeletal shadows across my wooden floor that seemed to pulse with life. My heart hammered against my ribs, yet I could not even gasp for air or let out the smallest whimper of terror in the dark. I lay there, trapped in my own skin, staring at the ceiling as the silence of the room became deafening and incredibly heavy. As the minutes ticked by, the pressure on my torso intensified until it felt like a physical weight was kneeling directly onto my lungs. I scanned every corner of the dim room, eyes darting frantically, but I saw nothing but the familiar furniture and the pale moon glow. In my mind, I began to panic, remembering stories my grandfather told me about unseen entities that fed on fear during the long night. I started to recite a specific protective verse he had taught me years ago, focusing every ounce of my mental energy on the words. It was a silent, desperate plea for strength, repeated over and over in the dark silence of my mind as I fought the weight. I could feel something standing right beside my head, though my eyes refused to show me the source of the overwhelming, dark dread. Suddenly, the oppressive weight vanished as if a tether had been cut, and I felt a cold rush of air sweep across my face. I bolted upright, gasping for breath and drenched in a cold sweat that made my sheets cling to my skin like a shroud. I fumbled for the lamp on my desk, flooding the room with a harsh yellow light that chased away the lingering deep shadows. The red numbers on my alarm clock glared back at me, showing that it was exactly 3:13 in the morning, the peak of night. I sat there for what felt like an eternity, listening to the house settle, convinced that something had just been watching me from the void. Every creak of the old wood sounded like a footstep, and I stayed awake until the sun finally began to peek over the trees. The next morning, I tried to explain the terrifying ordeal to my older brother while we sat in the kitchen eating our breakfast. He just laughed it off, telling me that I probably just had a bad case of indigestion or had watched too many horror movies. He made several jokes about my imagination and told me to grow up, insisting that there were no such things as spirits here. Even when I described the sensation of being held down, he remained completely skeptical, chalking it up to a common, well-known biological glitch. His lack of belief made me feel isolated, so I eventually stopped bringing it up and tried to convince myself that he was right. I spent the next few months sleeping with a small light on, always looking at the corners of the room before I slept. Everything changed a few months later when my brother decided to use my room for a quick afternoon nap while I was out. I returned home to find him standing in the hallway, looking incredibly pale and shaking as if he had just seen a ghost. He wouldn't look me in the eye, but he eventually admitted that he had woken up unable to move with a weight on him. He described the exact same feeling of a malevolent presence watching him, even though the room was filled with the bright afternoon sun. From that day forward, he refused to step foot in my bedroom alone and never mocked my story again, leaving us both terrified. We never found out what it was, but we both knew that something in that house didn't want us to be there alone.